Hello and welcome to West Indies on 99.94 Cricket Every Day. My name is Mashal St. Patrick here at one half of the Caribbean Cricket Podcast. And with me as ever is Santoki Nagulendran, the other half of the Caribbean Cricket Podcast. West Indies on 99.94 is your new home for West Indies cricket content. And we'll be dropping into your podcast feed on YouTube or on the 99.94 app several times every week. So rate, review, like, share, subscribe. You know what to do. And thanks for joining Cricket's Conversation. Yes, Santoki. Today on West Indies on 99.94, we're going to be looking at 2023, Santoki. We're 2 days into the new year. We can put 2022 behind us. Let's look ahead to 2023. Santoki, what are we saying? The rise of West Indies cricket this year. Yes or no, Santoki? Take it away.
So why are we doing this to ourselves, Mashal? I feel like, you know what though, 2022, I feel like it was a mixed year. The first half of the year, we had a series win against England, series win against Bangladesh. Nicholas Pooran took over as white ball captain. There was a sense of optimism. However, in the last 6 months, that has all crumbled away with defeats across all formats, which, as you know, spread a negative mood throughout the region. So we're going to look ahead to 2023. Dean, what would we determine to be a success for West Indies cricket in 2023, and what do we expect to happen? But I think the overriding theme of 2023 is not just for West Indies cricket, for world cricket as a whole. It just feels, there's always been a looming threat of franchise cricket taking over from international cricket. And you just get a sense with the UAE T20 League starting in about a week's time, South African T20 League starting again later this month, and a whole host of West Indian players featuring in those. You just feel 2023 is going to be a pivotal year in terms of this balance between franchise cricket and international cricket, and you just feel West Indian as a team will suffer the most.
Yeah, 100%. And it's weird because really and truly, maybe we should have titled this episode, "What Does Success Look Like for the West Indies in 2023 to 2027, because we could do this episode at the start of 2024, 2025, 2026, and it's probably the same message that we're actually saying. So really, it's about what's the next 4 years look like in the Future Tours program with regards to, I don't even want to call it the looming threat of T20 cricket, but just the reality, the financial reality of the global market. And I feel like the hosts Neil Manthorpe, etc., on South Africa on 99.94, they're having the exact same conversations that we're having. But really and truly, you could say it's the same show, because the same threats that South African cricket faces, the same threats that we face. But that notwithstanding, Santoki, if we put T20 to the side for 1 second and look at West Indies cricket, and let's try and pretend that international cricket still has primary say in the cricket calendar, what does realistic success look like for the West Indies in 2023? And I think, Santoki, let's go first and foremost. Let's start with the Test series, because people still love to pretend that's the pinnacle of cricket for everybody. We go to Zimbabwe in a month. In fact, this month. We go to Zimbabwe this month, later this month, then South Africa, and then India come in the summer. What's realistic, Santoki?
I think realistically, fans will be expecting a 2-0 win against Zimbabwe in February, however realistic that is. Considering, despite the loss in Australia, we still had a pretty good year in Test cricket. So you'd expect West Indies to get the win. However, Zimbabwe is a very tough place to go. We've only toured there, I think, 5 times in the last 22 years. And they've also recorded, players like Gary Balance, and you've still got Sikandar Raza in the side. So I think realistically, looking at those 6 tests, I think you'd have to be borderline delusional to think we'd get any results against South Africa or India. And that's not an insult on the West Indies Test team. It's just realistic. India and South Africa are a lot better, particularly the South African series. I felt like Jayden Seales would be our main threat on those pitches in South Africa. He's obviously been ruled out of that tour. So I think it's going to be very, very tough. So I think, me personally, a successful year would be a series win against Zimbabwe. And then South Africa or India, we play 4 tests. Maybe if we can get one miracle win in those 4 tests, however unrealistic. I think that would be for me the most optimistic I could be. A win against Zimbabwe in the series, and then perhaps one test where we get a miracle victory, either away in South Africa, which is I think unlikely, or home against India. You never know. But I think for me, 2-0, 2 out of 6 tests, as depressing as that sounds, would be a success for me in Test cricket in the context of who we're playing, Mash.
Listen, the thing is, I'm the same as you. I think if we could pull off a victory in South Africa in one of the tests, I mean, arguably home versus India is more difficult than away versus South Africa. Arguably, if we pull off one victory from 4 tests versus between South Africa and India, I think that's a successful year. If we're going to be realistic about the kind of disparity between the two sides, given conditions and so on and so forth, right? So I think that's fair enough. But swiftly moving on, Santoki, we do actually play quite a bit of white ball cricket this year. So in that same South Africa tour, it's actually a full format or multi-format tour. We got 3 ODIs, 3 T20s. Now, Santoki, mathematically speaking, we can still make the main stage of the ODI World Cup. But it could well be that by the time we pitch up in South Africa to play those 3 ODIs, it could well be that those are just warm-up games for the World Cup qualifiers. So let's deal with the elephant in the room, Santoki. Are we going to make it to the ODI World Cup? Now, in fact, there's 3 different scenarios I'm giving to you. Are we first and foremost going to end up in the ODI World Cup qualifiers? And if we are, do you think we have the capabilities to get out of those qualifiers to even get to the ODI World Cup in the summer, later in the year? Or can we feasibly, Santoki, look at a situation where in the summer, or it's not even in the summer, it's in October. Is it feasible, Santoki, that we won't even be at the biggest global event in world cricket?
It is very feasible. I mean, at the moment, it's hard to tell if we'll directly qualify for the World Cup. That all depends on South Africa. I think they need to win 3 out of their 5 remaining ODI games. 3 against England, 2 against Netherlands. You'd imagine they pick up the 2 wins against Netherlands, which means they just have to win 1 against England, and West Indies will be eliminated from direct contention for the World Cup. So we most probably will head into those qualifiers in June. I mean, it'd be foolish to rule out West Indies completely when you've got Shai Hope, one of the world's leading batsmen, Alzari Joseph, Nicholas Pooran. So we do have a chance, but at the same time, it's very realistic we could lose to the likes of Zimbabwe, Scotland, Ireland in those qualifiers. I think it's 2 out of the 10 teams taking part qualify. So it's going to be very, very tough for all the teams taking part, and West Indies are not exempt from that. So I could very, very realistically see a situation where it's twofold, Mash. We don't qualify for the ODI World Cup, and just taking it back to tests. We play Zimbabwe in February, then we play South Africa and India, and that's our tests for the remainder of the year. So feasibly, if we lose those 4 tests, and then we play Australia in January next year, and we'll most likely lose those 2 tests again. So we could very well go a whole year without winning a test match, on top of not qualifying for the ODI World Cup. Now, I know we titled this this episode, "What does success look like for West Indies?" But you have to be realistic, Mash. This time next year, it could be even worse for us.
Listen, okay. And the thing is, actually, it's probably the perfect segue then to say the following, because one of the things about what does 2023 look like and success, and we kind of hinted at it when we were wrapping up 2022. The reality is, if and when we end up in those ODI World Cup qualifiers, we'll have a new coach presiding over them. Yeah. That new coach is walking into they're walking into a fire situation straight away, Santoki, because you've already alluded to it in previous episodes. If West Indies don't make it to the ODI World Cup, if people thought the cuss out for the successive T20 World Cup failures was bad, if we don't make it to an ODI World Cup, I can legitimately see people around the Caribbean saying, you know what, just end this now. End West Indies cricket, because it really is a waste of time. Is that hyperbole, Santoki, or do you think the cuss out will reach manic proportions if we actually don't make it to the ODI World Cup?
Yeah, I think it will reach unprecedented levels, just because of the legacy of that ODI World Cup, I think it still has more of a standing amongst fans than the T20 World Cup, just because it does happen every 4 years and it's been going on since the 1970s. I think that has a legacy, and West Indies have never, ever failed to qualify for ODI World Cup. We came close last time to missing out, but we made it. So this will be the first time that happens. So I think it'd be unprecedented. And when you factor in, like I said, most probably at that time period, we would have just come off a loss in the Test series to South Africa. We're struggling in T20s. I just think it would all combine to create a situation where, you know, the calls for the death of West Indies as a side, as a team, will probably grow louder throughout the year. And that's unfortunate, but realistic in terms of where we are. But Mash, we're going to take a quick break. And when we come back on the other side, let's talk a bit more about sort of coaching appointments and who we think should be leading West Indies into 2023.
You're listening to Cricket's Conversation on 99.94. Whatever your team, we have the show for you on podcast, YouTube, or on the 99.94 app. We have India, England, South Africa, West Indies, and now Sri Lanka covered. If you want to find us, the best way is to follow us on social media at 9994DM by downloading the 9994 app or Google 99.94 on podcast. We speak cricket.
Now, Mash, Phil Simmons, after just over 3 years at the helm, resigned from his position as head coach after the Australia tour. And Andre Kohli has been named as interim coach. For those who don't know, Andre Kohli has been deeply involved in regional cricket with the West Indies Academy, Jamaica regional side for the past 15 years. So he knows the region very, very well. He's been tasked with leading the side for the Zimbabwe and South Africa tours. But Mash, just looking at that coaching appointment, sort of, what would you hope to get from Andre Kohli? Any new players into the side? Any change in style in terms of how West Indies play? What would you kind of deem as a success for Andre Kohli in this role? Bearing in mind, he's an interim coach, but he will no doubt be seeing this as an interview for the permanent position.
I mean, I don't see any situation whereby Andre Kohli becomes the permanent head coach of the West Indies team. He would have to engineer a 2-0 win in Zimbabwe and a 2-0 win in South Africa, plus win the ODI series versus South Africa and win the T20 series versus South Africa. For him to end up as the permanent coach, we'd have to have an unprecedented level of success in South Africa, right? Which we haven't even managed to do in the modern era or like in the last 20 years. So it's very unlikely that Kohli ends up as the permanent head coach. It's a weird one because obviously there's been a cuss out with regards to why has he even got the interim position. But people have to remember that the independent report that was sanctioned after we crashed out of the 2022 first round, the 2022 T20 World Cup in the first round stage, that's not been submitted yet. So Judge Thompson, Brian Lara, Mickey Arthur, they're still in interviewing all the different stakeholders. They're still trying to unpick what's gone wrong. They're going to submit their report. They're going to have a whole heap of recommendations. And I think, again, Santoki, it's something you've said before in the past. Once you submit a report like that, you can't then give an interim coach the job to get on with, I guess, implementing the suggestions from the report. It's got to be a brand new, fresh coach who then comes into the post off the back of that report. So in some ways, I almost feel like if I was Andre Kohli, I almost feel like it's a weird position, Santoki, because he must know that there's no chance he's getting the full-time job, right? At the same time, there's the West Indian pride to say, well, boy, you know, I want to show that I am a good coach and I can get this team playing and so on and so forth. But we're effectively going into the Zimbabwe tour and South Africa tour just treading water, you know? Like if I use like a business analogy, we're just trying to make sure that we keep the money ticking over whilst we wait for the brand new launch of West Indies cricket, like our 10th one or whatever it is that we're on at the moment, right? So it's a very, very peculiar situation to be in. And I think worst case scenario, Santoki, is let's say Kohli, so let's say we lose in Zimbabwe, which is possible, by the way. Let's say we lose in Zimbabwe and lose everything in South Africa. Like, what then? Is it just like blanks. Is that actually better for the new coach if we just lose everything prior to the new coach coming in? Because then almost the new coach picks up a side where we really are at rock bottom.
Yeah, I think you make very pertinent points there, Mash. I think the first thing is it could work in West Indies' advantage that Andre Coley knows, as you said, most likely 99% chance he's not going to be appointed permanent coach. Obviously, there's the small factor of if he manages to pull off miracle wins against South Africa across the formats. So this could work in our favour in terms of he could dramatically change the style or bring in new players into the West Indies squad because he has nothing to lose, essentially. He will know if we continue to play as we did against Australia, use the same players, utilise the same players, we'll lose against South Africa and might risk losing against Zimbabwe. So in that regard, risk-taking for him would benefit him because it would also show he can have his own sort of personal stamp on the team and change things. So that could work in our favour. It'd be interesting to see how he goes in terms of he's obviously part of the selection panel in terms of if he brings anyone in. You've been highly vocal of Brandon King coming into the side. So it'd be interesting to see sort of if he is given room to have his own personal mark on the side. And Mash, one other important thing we haven't mentioned, you talked about sort of, it seems like we're sort of stagnating until March and then a big reset button's going to be hit after March. That was also partly because Cricket West Indies elections will be in March. Now, Ricky Skerritt's coming to the end of his term. You'd expect his vice president, Dr. Kishore Shallow, would stand, but he'll face heavy opposition in the region, especially coming off the performances of West Indies cricket in the last 6 months. The opposition will have arguments in terms of results, poor performances, which they will heavily rely on in the election. So things are very finely balanced at the moment in West Indies cricket, depending on sort of who wins that election in March, Mash.
Yeah, 100%. I'm really glad you've touched on that because, again, anything, as much as we've titled this, what does success look like for West Indies in 2023? Really, we're talking about just what does 2023 look like in general, whether it's success or not success. And we cannot forget that the whole, probably from this month, the kind of political maneuvering and kind of cronyism and trying to win people over and patronage and trying to buy support and this, that, and the other is going to be hectic for the next 2 months because the next president, whoever it may be, I mean, do you know what, Santoki? I'm going to put my flag on the mast. I actually reckon it should be Kishore Shallow, right? Now, maybe people will say, "How can you two try?" And it was actually me, but how can you two endorse anybody? But the reason why I think it should be Kishore Shallow, Santoki, if he runs, is because I just don't think you can realistically judge the last 4 years of West Indies cricket without acknowledging that we had no cricket for 2 years due to the pandemic. And given the financial global market and its impact on West Indies cricket specifically, more than anybody else in the full member nations, I just don't see how you can pin all the blame on the current incumbents in office and say, well, you've messed up West Indies cricket, because no one ever had to deal with a pandemic before. In a region as financially stressed as the Caribbean, right? So going back to your kind of original point, how this all impacts and on the presidential campaign and who ends up with the post, because Santoki, say it's a new president, right? From an opposing camp to Skerritt and Shallow, they could rip up everything that's happened over the last 4 years. So as much as it's a reset that we're going to get a new coach in 2023, the whole of West Indies cricket could be reset in 2023 because whichever guy comes in 2023, they're unlikely to... It's like a change of government in a country. You can't acknowledge what was working before because you want to show people that I'm coming with a fresh set of changes that will really take West Indies cricket forward. So Santoki, we could be... By March 2023, we could be at a literal reset of everything in West Indies cricket again.
Yeah, no, I think you're definitely right. I think when you come in, when you win a leadership contest as the opposition, as you said, in anything, government, sports, you want to make a statement, make a stamp of authority. So you essentially rip up what's happened before. So there could be big changes coming after March. And obviously that's probably why Andre Coley's only been appointed as interim until March, because whoever's the new administration, whether it's Dr. Shallow or the opposition, they'll obviously have their own ideas about who should be head coach going forward. So I guess, Mash, it's an interesting one, because a lot of what happens in terms of success and how we perform in West Indies and what happens in our cricket depends on this election happening in 2 months' time. So everything, like I said, is finally balanced. But Mash, I think we're going to take another break, and when we come back, let's touch upon the new regional season that's commencing later this month.
If you love the language of cricket and want more, then head over to the 99.94 app and you can hear all of our podcasts and cricket commentary. We're adding new shows all the time and covering cricket series from all over the world. Be the first to hear all of our announcements by following us on social media at 9994DM. Welcome to Cricket's Conversation.
Now we've touched upon international cricket and the administration. I don't think we need to really touch on the T20 performances this year, because there's no World Cup. We'll obviously be playing a handful of bilaterals, but you just feel without a World Cup, they're lacking any context. You feel West Indies will be judged this year on our test performances as ever, and also the ODIs this year because of that World Cup and the qualification scenario. Now, Mash, let's delve deeper into the regional season. Now, because of COVID, as you mentioned, it's massively hindered sort of what the administration can kind of arrange in the region. You know, it's expensive to travel island to island. Logistically, it's very hard. So recently, last season, our regional season was only 5 games instead of 10. There was the belief that now that things have kind of gone back to normal, we would go back to the 10-round regional season. However, it's been announced by Cricket West Indies in the past few weeks, we'll stay playing 5 rounds, and there'll be an additional triangular tournament. I think it's called the Headley Weeks tournament, which is where essentially the best players get divided up into 2 teams and they play games against the West Indies academy before meeting in the showdown final. So it's essentially best of the best, while also giving the academy a chance to kind of play against these players in the region in their own tournament. Now, Mash, sort of what are your opinions on this season? It's got mixed reviews. A lot of people are saying there are benefits to it in terms of identifying who the best players are in the region and then giving the academy a chance. While a lot of fans are saying there's essentially not enough regional cricket for the side.
Okay, first things first, I would have preferred a 10-round season. I think we all would have done. But again, Santoki, it all boils down to the global market and the financial reality of cricket within the Caribbean that doesn't affect some of the other full member nations as much as it does the West Indies. I think, Santoki, 2 things have happened here. Out of the back of the pandemic, when Cricket West Indies had to impose 50% pay cuts and essentially be really creative in how to get cricket back on when there was basically lockdowns and no domestic cricket and so on and so forth. We saw it last year where we only ran a 5-round domestic championship, right? And also we saw how the domestic championship was only held in 2 countries. I think it was Trinidad and Antigua. I can't remember if those were the 2 that it was held in, right? I actually think what's happened, Santoki, is they've realized, wait a minute, because of the financial logistics of moving people around in the Caribbean, because again, we have to remember that people outside of the region don't understand how expensive it is to travel in the Caribbean, but within the Caribbean, right?
Yeah.
I think Cricket West Indies have looked at this purely financially and said, hold on, the pandemic showed us that A, it's better to just host all of the teams in 1 or 2 places only. B, if we have a shortened tournament and host it in only specific places, we don't have to add all of the extra costs of trying to move 6 teams around the Caribbean. We're waiting on particular airlines to be available. They might not be available and so on and so forth, which therefore means you're limiting when you can host the tournament and so on and so forth. And then C, Santoki, we only have 6 tests a year now for the next 4 years. Now, I've had this out with a couple of people. I think you have to think pragmatically, Santoki. If you know now you only have 6 tests a year, what are you running a 10-round tournament for exactly? Because the financial reality is the money that we're going to now make in West Indies cricket is probably coming off short format cricket. And of course, when India tour and England tour, and England ain't even touring for the next 4 years. So what are we, knowing that Test cricket is losing its primacy and significance for the smaller 4-member nations, what is a 10-round tournament actually benefiting? And it's similar to that argument that you and I have had about someone like a Tay Shandapal, just broken into the West Indies test side, but he now knows at the age of 26 the maximum number of tests I can play by the end of the 4-year Future Tours program is 18. Santoki, so what? You want a man to play 10 first-round games per season to play a total of 18 test matches in a 4-year period. It just, I think logistically, it doesn't make sense anymore. And then, sorry, and I'll just finish by saying, so I think that's why also they've then said, well, hold on, if there's no real purpose to a long season because we don't play enough test matches, it's better to almost create a graded, what am I saying here? A graded selection system. So 5 rounds, then we identify who's the best play off against the best with the academy because we want to nurture the young players, and at least then we'll know who are really the best players in the region. Do you see where I'm coming from?
Yeah, I think so. I think there's an expectation, a sort of a belief that, administration should prioritize test cricket, and so 10 regional games would make sense. But like you said, Mash, our test cricket finishes in July for the year, so essentially most of the regional games will happen, and we'll only have a 2-test series against India coming up. So what would be the point of stretching out the season when you've only got 2 tests to play for the remainder of the year? Now, it's important to note that Johnny Grave of Cricket West Indies did say that they were looking to sort of have more A-team tours later on in the year. So that would be something which would sort of balance things out by having an A-team tour, which I'd like to see players who, like someone like a Tagenarine Chandapur, who are in the test setup now, go back down and play A-team tours just to get red ball cricket against other sides. And then you can put in emerging players as well. So that would be good to see A-team tours fill in the second half of the year. But as you said, Mash, I think realistically, we only play 1 3-test series. I think that's against England in 2024. The rest of our series are all 2 tests. So that means you naturally lack a narrative and sort of a long enough series for players to develop against sides. And you just feel once this goes to 2027, we'll probably play less tests than that. So this could essentially be the pattern of, as you said, rightly said, what is the point of playing 10 regional rounds? I know it's been tradition for us to do that, but that was when we played a lot more tests. With the amount of tests reducing and more importantly, their importance being reduced, is there a need to play 10 rounds of cricket? That's a massive question, an existential question, which we'll only find out in the coming years. And I think going back to Mashal, going full circle to what we touched upon right at the top of the show, franchise cricket, the South African and UAE League now will cut into the regional season. So I don't think it will massively affect the availability of players this season, because those who will play regional cricket will play regional cricket. Those who are playing franchise will. But I think going forward in 2-3 years, you could see emerging players choose to play in those franchise leagues over committing to the regional season. And I think it also puts a full stop on, the question marks around whether Nicholas Pooran or Evan Lewis will ever play a first-class season. Because if you're in demand as they are on the franchise circuit, essentially now there's no space in the calendar to even play 1 game in the regional season, because it's all fully taken up. So I think that advent of more franchise cricket throughout the year has essentially also put a stop on players committed to regional cricket, those guys who can make money in the white ball arena. So I think everything's sort of coming to a head to sort of reduce not only the importance of test cricket, but also the regional season is going to be massively hindered going forward. It's never going to change. We're never going to see a reduction in franchise leagues. It will only grow. So you'll see less and less players, and that means less talent commit to playing regional season in West Indies cricket.
Listen, the reality is this for me, Santoki, it's a podcast episode in itself. If people didn't, it's actually funny, Santoki. 10 years ago, when Gale, Bravo, Narain, Russell, Pollard were all doing their thing, and people were saying you lot are mercenaries and this, that, and the other. Listen, fast forward, it's now 2023. Here's my thing, Santoki. Everybody in the Caribbean now wants to chase the big bag, because the world game has changed. There is that we cannot feasibly look at our region and the players in our region, and this goes for the men's game and the women's game, because remember, Santoki, there's a women's IPL coming, there's a women's PSL, there's already the women's CPL. Everybody in our region wants the big bag, and the big bag is in short format cricket. So Cricket West Indies and all the smaller boards, New Zealand and all that lot, are going to have to be even more pragmatic going forward about how to shape international cricket in that kind of global market culture. But listen, Santoki, we couldn't fit everything in. And I just want to point out to people, because we're going to get some comments after this episode saying, you lot didn't even talk about women's cricket. There's a World Cup coming up. I know, people. So when we say what does success look like for West Indies in 2023, this was just part one. We just, because we also didn't talk about, do you think, and I'll let you finish the show, but do you think, Santoki, we can get through 2023 without a scandal or a cuss out that ruins West Indies' name?
Listen, the big question is, can we get through January without a scandal or a cuss out? Ruins our name. Never a dull day in West Indies cricket. Expect an emergency podcast probably in the next 2 or 3 days, because something will have inevitably happened. But I think, Mash, let's summarize. So let's answer the question of the title. What does success look like for the West Indies senior men's team in 2023? For me, I'll go first. I think a 2-0 win in Zimbabwe would be a success, regardless of whether we were losing to South Africa or India. And then for me, the big one is qualifying directly for the 2023 ODI World Cup. I think if we can qualify directly, whether that be because South Africa are so terrible they don't qualify themselves, or whether we go through the qualifiers and finish in that top 2, I think for me, that encapsulates what success would look like on the field for West Indies in 2023, qualifying for that ODI World Cup in India in October.
Okay, here's my take. Beating Zimbabwe, the South Africa tour, and then when India come in the summer are full format tours, right? So realistic success in those games means finding a way to win 50% of the games across the formats. So I don't care where the wins come, just finding a way to win 50% of the games across the different formats by the end of those 2 tours. And then the big one, I think the big one success West Indies, and this shows you where our game is at, Santoki, get into the World Cup. Just get in there. I don't care how we get there, whether if it's England helping us to beat South Africa, just get into the World Cup. Will be success, Santoki. We can talk about what we actually do at the World Cup later on, but just get in there will be successful in 2023.
I think on that note, we set the bar in terms of our expectations. So as long as we can make it into that main draw for the World Cup by any means necessary, scramble through. That's where West Indies cricket are. But no, I think for most fans in the region, most stakeholders, that's where we'll be judged. The World Cup is such a big tournament. I think that would represent, probably even irrespective of the test results, if we lose all the tests for 2023, if we make it to the World Cup, I think that will be the biggest thing which our success will be judged on, and that's going to be. We'll find out in the coming months whether that does happen. But Mash, it's been the first episode of 2023. As we said, we never know what's going to happen in West Indies cricket. You get the feeling it's going to be another dramatic year. So that's it from us here, and I'll leave the final word to you, Mash.
Yeah. New Year, people. Happy New Year, by the way, for all those listening in. Continue to tune in on West Indies on 99.94 for the remainder of the year. And, of course, expect to see an emergency pod within the next 10 days or so, because you know what the take is for West Indies cricket. There's never a quiet day in West Indies cricket. Stay locked in, people.